Stop, you haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now, we have new stories every day. Now let's go. My daughter Emily, who's just turned 18, and I stood by as my wife, Tiffany, and her boss, Ryan, 25, packed her suitcases into his car. He came to pick her up on Sunday morning for a Monday meeting in Los Angeles. They were catching a flight that evening, needing to be in town for meetings before some big negotiations. Tiffany, still striking at 44 after 25 years of marriage, stood tall at 5 feet 7 inches with dark brown hair and deep blue eyes. Despite adding a few pounds over the years, she maintained that slim, curvy figure that always caught people's attention. We got married right after high school, and I worked hard to support her through college, taking online courses myself. Childbirth never really changed her looks, and after she graduated law school, we moved back to Alamance County to be near family. By then, we had 2 kids, and Emily came along during Tiffany's first year as a lawyer. I watched Ryan with a knot of emotions in my gut, disliking that arrogant smirk of his and the way he carried himself, so sure of his place. I wanted to confront him, but I held back, knowing it wouldn't do any good. They were both heading out for some civil case, but thanks to a tip from a woman named Rachel, I knew there was more going on. I had already been tipped off about their alternative plans. Tiffany and Ryan had turned down our offer to drive him to the airport, preferring the comfort of his car. It irritated me that I had no idea when they'd be back. Physically, Ryan and I were pretty much the same, close in age, height, and build, but I was ready for a confrontation if it came to that. Emily must have noticed my growing frustration and wisely stepped in, stopping me from doing something I might regret. We waved goodbye from the porch as Tiffany likely looked forward to whatever awaited her in Los Angeles. Tiffany's promotion to associate partner at the firm 2 years ago had turned our lives upside down, and not in a good way. The power went straight to her head, though she kept it well hidden from everyone but me. It was Rachel, Ryan's wife, who had reached out to me, spilling the details about his string of affairs with women at work. She said this was the last straw and that she and her father had set a trap. After Ryan's car finally disappeared down the road, Emily and I went back inside. "Does Mom have any idea we know what's really going on?" Emily asked me. "That Ryan's just adding her to his list." "Probably not," I answered. "Your mom's always been blind to the truth, even with all that legal training. She doesn't take rumors seriously and thinks she can keep it under control. To her, it's probably just an exciting break from the routine. She'll get a rude awakening when she realizes she's just another fling for him." Emily frowned. "So why didn't you stop her if you knew?" "You know your mom," I replied. "If I tried to warn her, she'd just brush it off, call me jealous. It'd turn into one big argument and nothing would change her mind." "Does his wife know?" Emily asked. "Yeah, she knows. And her dad too," I said. "They're ready to catch him in the act. It's not his first time. Rachel's had enough. Her kids are grown and she's done with the whole charade." "Will you forgive Mom?" Emily asked, looking worried. "Not this time," I said firmly. "I forgave her once, but this is different. It's time to move on. Divorce has been on the table since she left this morning." I'll never forget the shock on my daughter's face. Like her siblings, she had no idea about her mother's past. Learning about her infidelity must have hit her hard. "Dad, you've got to explain," she urged. "I don't get it." "You're the youngest, Emily, so keep this between us," I said. "Before you were born, your mom cheated. She kept it hidden until she got pregnant. If a test hadn't confirmed you were mine, I would have left. Luckily, the paternity test proved you were." Emily looked stunned. Only 3 people in the family had known this secret, and we kept it buried for years. "Who was he? Do we know him?" she asked. "It's been 18 years since I spoke to him," I replied. "Your Uncle Rick. You and the other kids call him Uncle Rick." Emily took a moment to process the revelation. She now understood why I always kept my distance from family events with Rick, why her grandparents split Christmas between him and me. It all made sense now. "You could text Rick about Tiffany's trip and stir things up if you want," I joked lightly. Then I headed to the kitchen, brewed some coffee, and grabbed the local paper, scanning for new listings, rentals, houses. With Emily heading to college soon, Tiffany could stay here until she graduated, but I needed to move before her return. I knew Judge Wallace would prioritize the kids' needs and the divorce, so I had to plan ahead. Emily's phone buzzed, and she spoke quietly for a bit. "Uncle Rick confessed to everything," she told me later. "He feels for you and wants to talk." After 18 years, I figured maybe it was time to hear his side of the story. Tiffany's actions had forced me to revisit the past, and though I felt betrayed, I'd stayed for the kids, hoping to keep our home intact. Grabbing a bottle of bourbon, I asked Emily to drive me to meet Rick. We had our usual spot, an old fishing hole on our father's land. Sitting by the fire, passing the bottle between us, Rick laid it all out. His version was different from Tiffany's, but I figured the truth was somewhere in between. In the end, I didn't care anymore. Hearing Rick take responsibility was enough. I placed more of the blame on Tiffany. Rick had always been more of a follower than a leader. At some point, our father spotted the fire and, thinking we were trespassing teens, approached us with his old rifle. He ended up giving us a ride back to the farmhouse in Rick's truck. Mom whipped up some eggs and potatoes to help us sober up, just like when we were kids. By the time we finished eating, Mom had already called Emily and Rick's wife, Mary. When they arrived, we were in better shape. Mary, who married Rick after my parents' divorce, looked confused to see us together. "So you finally made peace," Mary said. "After all these years, we deserve to know what caused the split." I opened my mouth to speak, but Rick nudged me, just like when we were kids. It was his signal to keep quiet. Rick had always been better at talking his way out of trouble, but this time I was wrong. Tiffany and I, Rick confessed, had an affair while she was pregnant with Emily. He admitted it was his fault. He was immature and foolish at the time. My younger brother, always more level-headed, had caught us, and ever since then, he saw me as dead to him. Hearing the truth about our fallout, my dad exclaimed, "Dan, if I were Marcus, I'd have gotten rid of you." "What made you spill the beans?" Mom asked. "Tiffany flew to Los Angeles with her boss," I explained. "They only booked one hotel room for the whole stay, which raised some suspicions. Rachel, Ryan's wife, has hired private investigators. Emily knows what's going on, and it's tough for her to watch her mother acting all excited about this trip." "I should have let you confront him, Dad," my daughter said, locking eyes with me. There was a moment of silence before I continued. "Since Tiffany's keeping the house while Emily is in college, I need to find a new place before she comes back." "Dad, I'm not staying with Mom," Emily declared firmly. "Wherever you go, I go. We're sticking together." Emily had the same stubborn streak I had, and she meant every word, no matter what came next. "Come upstairs with me, Emily," Mom said, and they disappeared for a while. When they returned, we had a new plan. We'd stay with my parents for the time being, and all we needed were our clothes. On the drive home, Emily gave me a hard time. "You got to stop defending Mom," she said. "We're grown-ups now." She knew what she was doing with Ryan in L.A., thinking she wouldn't get caught. That says a lot about how she sees us. When we got back home that Monday night, we slowly started moving our stuff out, each of us taking what we cared most about: my rocking chair, her makeup table, the TV. Tiffany kept us updated throughout the week, though the progress was slow. Then, on Thursday, Rachel called and suggested we meet up in a nearby restaurant, Jack's Roadhouse, around 8 p.m. I arrived in my work clothes minus the tie. I recognized Rachel by the white scarf she had on, and as I introduced myself, I was struck by her beauty. She was much younger than I expected, maybe 10 years my junior, with long blonde hair and soft blue eyes. She dressed conservatively but still looked great. It turned out she was a kindergarten teacher, which explained her simple outfit. I, on the other hand, worked as an HR manager at a nursing home, so my attire was more formal. Rachel revealed that Tiffany and Ryan would be in Los Angeles for the weekend, and about 70% of their work on the case was done. They'd be served legal papers as soon as they got back. She asked how I was holding up, and I told her this time felt different. We were discussing it openly, unlike last time when it all happened behind closed doors. I mentioned that my older brother, Rick, was part of the mess 18 years ago, before Emily was even born. We hadn't spoken since then, until my daughter made us patch things up last Sunday. That reunion had left me with the worst hangover I'd had in years. Rachel chuckled as I added, "What made it worse was our dad finding us like a couple of teenagers and dragging us home." Rachel found that amusing but commented on how nice it must have been to be with family again. I told her Emily and I were staying with my parents for now and only brought along what was necessary. I also mentioned that I planned to keep Tiffany's number active until Sunday, after which I'd block her for good. Before parting ways, Rachel and I went to a nearby bar and danced for a while. Despite everything, I left feeling pretty good, that is, until I got home and Emily started teasing me. "Daddy's got a new girlfriend," she joked, clearly picking up on the chemistry between Rachel and me. Sunday dinner was special. My mom was thrilled to cook for us again, and we all ate well, leaving barely any leftovers. But around 1 a.m., a phone call jolted me awake. It was Rachel, confirming that Tiffany and Ryan had been caught. Hotel detectives walked in on them, and everything had been filmed on hidden cameras. She sent me a temporary copy of the video. I got up, dressed, and headed downstairs to make tea. My mom joined me as I was finishing up. "Is the water still hot?" she asked. I poured her a cup and showed her the video on my phone. I watched as her expression shifted. The footage was crystal clear. Tiffany and Ryan, caught undressed under the sheets, looking like deer in headlights. Their shocked reactions made it obvious that they hadn't been acting innocently. Mom quickly saved a copy of the video to her phone. "We're done with Tiffany," Mom said firmly. "I can't wait to see the look on her face when she gets served with the lawsuit," I added. "Emily and I blocked her number tonight," I said, reminding her that we had already prepared for this. That night, Mom took Tiffany's phone, and I helped her block all communication. Sharing tea with my mom in the middle of the night brought back fond memories. Later, I instructed the receptionist to block any calls from Tiffany, not wanting to deal with her. By 11 a.m., the receptionist called me. "She's been trying to reach you every 20 minutes. What should we do?" "What's your mobile number?" I asked. She gave it to me, and I replied, "I'm sending you a video clip. If she calls again, ask for her cell number. Once you get it, send her the video and tell her that both Emily and I received it last night." That was the last I heard from Tiffany that day. Before leaving, the receptionist confirmed, "I did what you asked." She stopped calling after getting the video. "If you or Emily need anything, just let me know." I nodded in agreement. "Thanks, boss," I muttered, keeping my thoughts to myself while my mom prepared dinner and Emily helped out in the kitchen. I briefed my daughter on a work incident when suddenly a text came through from an unfamiliar number, claiming to be from my mom, asking me to call her. It didn't take long to realize it was probably Ryan's number. "I think your brothers might try to contact us around 8 o'clock tonight," I remarked. "Your mom will likely reach out to them. By now, they've probably realized we're not at the house. They'll be in for a surprise," Emily chuckled. I left a note for Mom, saying she might want to make Ryan move out, considering his wife kicked him out. "It's funny because I know Tiffany will never admit the truth to our brothers," Emily suggested. "Hey, Dad," Emily said, "let's turn off our phones for a while. That way, they'll have to call Mom to figure out what's going on." "That's exactly what we did," I replied, giving us a peaceful evening, even if it wasn't so calm for others. Later, we learned that my sons had visited the old house. After noticing my favorite chair was gone, they searched the entire place. When they found Emily's note in the kitchen, it became clear that we had moved out. Their calls went unanswered, adding to their frustration. Tiffany played dumb, claiming she had no idea what the note meant or where we had gone. Eventually, they turned to Rick, who hinted that maybe I didn't want to be found, given what their mother had done. Strangely, they never thought to question how Rick knew. As the news of our breakup spread faster than gossip, I got a call at work from my eldest son, Cole, after my secretary connected us. He didn't waste any time after the initial pleasantries. "So what's up, Dad? Where are you and Emily living now?" "Not much," I replied. "Everything that was wrong is now right, and vice versa." "Let's not get into religion, Dad," he sighed. "Just give me the facts." "Check your texts," I said. "I sent you something that'll answer your questions. Forward it to Lloyd. If you want to talk, swing by Grandpa's after dinner." With that, I ended the call, sent the video of Tiffany and Ryan's affair, and notified Emily. Within 10 minutes, Cole responded with, "Wow, I'll be at Grandpa's by 8. My parents excused themselves when Cole and Lloyd arrived, leaving us to talk through the situation. My sons didn't see their mother's actions as severe and advised me to just move on. We all make mistakes, Dad. Remember how many times you forgave us growing up. This didn't sit well with their sister. You may be my brothers, but you're both idiots," Emily spat angrily. "This wasn't an accident. Mom and Ryan planned everything. The hotel was booked as Mr. and Mrs. Ryan wore a week before they left." Watching my sons' faces as Emily laid out the events was something I'll never forget. "We watched Mom leave the house that Sunday afternoon, knowing she was going to cheat," Emily continued. "Dad offered to drive her to the airport, but no, she wanted to show off by leaving with him. We were probably the butt of their jokes all the way to Los Angeles. She had no idea we knew what was going on." Emily turned to me. "Why didn't you stop her, Dad?" I explained. She would have lied, denied it all. "Your mom's actions showed she was already leaving the marriage. This wasn't an accident. It was premeditated. Dad and I knew 2 weeks before she left," Emily emphasized. "Ryan's wife, Rachel, warned us. That's why we had video footage ready within an hour of serving them the lawsuits." "Boys, you need to understand, Mom didn't just betray Dad. She betrayed all of us. I looked at my children. I'm seeing a doctor tomorrow to get tested for STDs," I admitted. Their stunned faces said it all. I can't be sure she didn't have other lovers on the side. This may be the first time she's been caught, but her frequent business trips raise suspicions. "Dad, you can't be serious," Lloyd protested. "There's no way Mom had other lovers." Given what we've learned, I countered, can we trust her to tell the truth? I left them to process the information, excusing myself to grab a coffee. My parents, who had been listening from the sidelines, agreed with my approach. "You're handling this wisely, Marcus," my father remarked. "Given her job and all those trips, it's plausible she had other partners." "Mediations, business trips, they could have provided plenty of opportunities," I added. "Even if she had separate phones, those calls might have gone unnoticed." A call interrupted our conversation, and I stepped out onto the veranda to answer. "Hi, Rachel. What's going on?" Rachel told me about her recent conversation with Ryan. "It didn't go well," she said. "He still doesn't understand why I'm divorcing him. He thinks I should just forgive and forget, but I made it clear I don't want him in our daughter's life anymore." That's when it hit him how much damage his actions caused. She also mentioned that Tiffany was having a hard time now that she was unemployed. They'll be back Thursday to settle everything. I blocked Tiffany's number, and the receptionist is turning down her calls. I even sent her the video you gave me so she knows we're all aware. Rachel added, "Ryan's stuff is in the garage until he picks it up, and I've changed the locks." We exchanged a few more words before saying goodnight. I returned to the kitchen, where my family was waiting for my next move. "I'm taking tomorrow off," I announced. "I have a lawyer appointment at 9. I want those two served with lawsuits as soon as they touch down." Tears welled up in my son's eyes as they realized the gravity of the situation. My father spoke up. "Ryan won't be the first, but he will be the last," he said firmly. "That's not true," Lloyd protested. "Mom denied it until we showed her the video." "You're clueless," my mother interjected. "Ever wonder why your father never spoke to Uncle Rick until now?" "They patched things up last Sunday," Emily added. Rick admitted Dad didn't deserve what happened back then, but it happened. Tensions ran high as we discussed the family's history. I put on the kettle, giving my children time to process everything. Later, after my sons left, I sat down with my parents for a quiet heart-to-heart. "They'll be watching how you handle this," my mom warned. "What you do now will guide them." "I understand, Mom," I replied. "I'll stay calm and let the lawyers take care of things. I can't change the past, but I can control how I respond moving forward." At the lawyer's office the next day, I laid out the events leading us to this point. Her ears perked up when I mentioned Tiffany's employer. "Did you know I once worked for that firm?" she asked. "They have a strict code of ethics. We might consider suing the firm as well, though we might not gain much besides covering legal fees. Still, it would cause significant issues for them." I agreed to move forward. They'd be back from LA on the earliest Thursday flight out of St. Louis. After paying her fee, she seemed eager to take the case. I felt a bit like David facing Goliath. The company Tiffany worked for was the biggest in the area, with multiple divisions. Later, at the doctor's office, my family doctor seemed surprised by my request for STI tests. Though unexpected, he agreed it was a smart move. Meanwhile, I learned that Cole had informed his mother about my tests. He didn't hold back, telling her that because of Rick and Ryan, there was still uncertainty about how far her betrayals went. That evening, Rachel and I met for dinner at Red Lobster. She greeted me with a warm smile, and we chatted casually. Rachel passed me an envelope as we sat down, containing statements from 5 of Ryan's former subordinates. They detail how he coerced them into inappropriate situations. "This strengthens our case," I remarked. "Originally, my lawyer thought just covering her fees would be enough, but now it looks like we could expose a wider pattern of misconduct." Rachel and I bonded over our shared experiences, and as I returned home close to midnight, I reflected on how much had changed since Tiffany left. Later that night, I made tea for Emily and noticed tears in her eyes. I handed her a cup and said, "It's okay to let it out. Crying is part of healing." She hugged me tightly, releasing the emotions she'd held in. By the time we finished our tea, she had calmed down. Curious about my dinner with Rachel, Emily asked a few questions. I explained that we were just starting to get to know each other and that it felt like the beginning of a solid friendship. The next day, I dropped off the statements with my lawyer, who proposed turning the case into a class action lawsuit. I agreed, hoping it would bring more accountability. Later, I heard that Tiffany and Ryan's return wasn't smooth. Despite the settlement, their actions had made headlines, overshadowing any sense of victory. On my way home, I withdrew some cash and surprised my mom with $1,000. She gave me a look only a mother could give. "It's to help with the extra expenses while we're staying here," I explained. "It would have cost me way more anywhere else." "This is a one-time thing," she agreed sternly. I nodded, grateful for her support. Tiffany returned to an empty house, feeling like an outcast. After enduring a day full of hostility, both she and Ryan were unwelcome. Her husband, Marcus, and his attorney were suing the entire firm, and Tiffany couldn't wrap her mind around how Marcus had found a former employee to represent him, someone who would never have made partner otherwise. It wasn't just about the lawsuit, but the fact that Marcus had hired someone familiar with all the firm's legal tricks, putting them at a disadvantage from the start. After mixing herself a rye cocktail, Tiffany sat down and started reading through the divorce petition. The reality hit her hard. Marcus and Emily had known about her and Ryan's plans when they left for Los Angeles. Now she had to face the end of her marriage. Feeling regretful, she texted Marcus and Emily, realizing the damage was beyond repair. She hoped to buy some time, thinking that if Marcus calmed down, they might talk. But Cole's words echoed in her mind. Her actions now seemed deceitful to everyone, and it wasn't worth all the pain she was causing. While sorting through the mail, Tiffany found a letter from the county health department revealing she had contracted an STD. Overwhelmed, she broke down in tears, realizing that this nightmare was only getting worse. Her past business trip encounters would now make her family think even less of her. Meanwhile, Ryan sat at a dimly lit bar on the edge of town, drowning his sorrows. Rachel had filed for divorce, and as he reflected on everything, he didn't even notice the man who had quietly taken a seat beside him. Suddenly, a commotion erupted, and in the chaos, Ryan was hit 3 times in the face. His assailant's words echoed Marcus' resentment, making it clear why he had been attacked. Back at my father's barn, I was working on some chores one Saturday afternoon when my eldest son, Cole, showed up. His stubbornness was evident. After comforting his distraught mother, Tiffany, he was insistent that I should take her back for the sake of keeping peace in the family, despite the havoc her actions had caused. Realizing there was no point in arguing, I let him vent until he was done. "Cole, imagine you were married," I began, "and you found out your wife was being unfaithful. Would you still be giving the same advice?" His silence said everything. I continued, "You're telling me to accept being with someone who betrayed me. Does that mean you think I'm insignificant, someone to be walked over?" The shock on his face was undeniable. Seeing his distress, I said firmly, "If you can't respect my decisions, then don't come back." I left him standing there, knowing he needed time to process what I said. He turned to his uncle Rick for advice, who admitted, "Cole, your mother came after me, not the other way around." I felt for her, and it led to 18 years of separation from my brother. There are 2 sides to every story. Your dad is right. Your mother didn't get that STD from Ryan. She brought it home, showing she didn't value your father after everything he did for this family. Fix this before you lose your dad forever. Monday morning, at the firm where Tiffany and Ryan worked, the atmosphere was triumphant. My lawsuit had been dropped, and they were back in good standing, receiving praise for their successful case settlements. Despite his injuries from the bar fight, Ryan pressed on, privately sharing the ordeal with Tiffany. Later that day, as I exited the nursing home where I worked, I found Tiffany waiting by my car. She looked exhausted and defeated. "Back off, Tiffany," she snapped. "Ryan's got enough problems, thanks to your little revenge scheme." "I have no idea what you're talking about," I replied, playing it cool. "He jumped," she insisted. "The guy said he was your friend and that we keep doing it." I couldn't help but laugh. Once I composed myself, I said, "If I knew who did it, I'd buy them a whiskey. Your lover got off easy. If it were me, he'd be gone." Just then, I got an urgent text from Rachel, asking me to come over right away. I quickly told Tiffany, "Get your lawyer and finalize the divorce." Without another word, I drove off, done with her lies and manipulations. When I arrived at Rachel's place, she looked visibly upset. "What's wrong?" I asked. "One of your dad's friends punched Ryan, using your name," she explained. I couldn't hide my grin, which brought some relief to Rachel's face. "Aren't you mad?" she asked. "Nope," I replied. "I just wish I knew where he lived so I could send him a bottle of whiskey." Rachel chuckled as I hugged her briefly. Before I could apologize, she surprised me with a kiss on the cheek. "They're both inside waiting to talk to you," she said, leading me into the kitchen, still holding my hand. Her 2 daughters, Lucia and Lisa, peeked out from their room, and I gave them a playful wink, which they returned. Rachel's father, a tall, imposing man, greeted me with a smile. I extended my hand, saying, "If I could, I'd send you a big bottle of whiskey as a thank you." He accepted a handshake, adding, "Think before you do anything foolish. My dad's advice saved me trouble when I was your age." With the tension eased, formal introductions followed, and soon enough, it was time for him to take his grandson home. That left Rachel, her daughters, and me. The girls excitedly introduced themselves, telling me about their favorite restaurant, all-you-can-eat pizza place called Papadino's. "How about I treat you and your mom to dinner there?" I asked. They eagerly agreed, likely influenced by my casual attire. "Just give me a second to call my mom and let her know I won't be home for dinner," I said with a smile. At the restaurant, Rachel's colleagues waved at her while she grabbed more pizza. Meanwhile, Lucia turned to me. "Are you Mom's boyfriend?" she asked. I smiled and replied, "I'm just a guy, her friend." "Did you go on a date?" she pressed. "Not yet, but I'd need permission from someone special first," I teased. "Who?" Lucia asked curiously. "From you and your sister," I said, which made them laugh. They giggled and said, "You can, because Mom already says she likes you." By the time Rachel returned with more food, we were all in good spirits. Lissa asked me if I could get her dessert, and after we finished up at the restaurant, I thanked them at their front door. The girls hurried inside, ready for bed. Feeling a bit awkward, I prepared to say goodnight, but Rachel called after me, stopping me on the steps. She leaned in and kissed me, and I couldn't help but respond. My daughter said you were going to ask me out, Rachel revealed with a grin. Lucia got it wrong, I explained, but I did think about it while you were busy with your colleague. We sat on the porch like teenagers, talking about our feelings and where things might go from here. With September winding down, we planned to take the girls to the town fair the following Saturday, agreeing to figure out our next step afterward. It was nearly 10 o'clock when I arrived back at my parents' farm. Walking in, Emily quickly noticed my upbeat mood. Looks like Dad's got a big grin, she observed. That meeting must have been important. I caught my parents and Emily up on the day's events. My dad found it amusing that Tiffany had asked me to back off from Ryan, and on Friday, my lawyer launched a new lawsuit against the firm. For senior partners and 16 women were jointly charged, and the claim was hand-delivered to the partners' homes. 3 of them were barred from returning by their spouses. Linda O'Neill, my attorney, was relentless in her pursuit of information, including finding out who Tiffany's divorce lawyer was. Mom even emailed Tiffany's relatives, informing them about how Tiffany and Ryan were served with the lawsuit, revealing this wasn't Tiffany's first affair during her business trips, and mentioning my STD diagnosis. As I was getting ready to pick up Rachel and the kids for the fair, Emily remarked, "You're really into Rachel, aren't you, Dad?" I admitted, since the divorce started, many of the friends your mom and I shared have faded away. Rachel and I bonded over our shared experiences, which made it easy to trust her. I don't know where things are headed, but I'm open to the possibilities. If you need dating tips, just ask, Emily teased. Just promise to introduce us before it gets serious, I replied. Later at the fair, I spent an hour on the Ferris wheel with Rachel's daughters, who enjoyed every second. We ate plenty of food with Lisa perched on my shoulders most of the time. Afterward, we bumped into Rick and his wife, Mary, who introduced their kids. The children hit it off, leaving us adults to chat. By 6 p.m., the girls were exhausted. After bathing and tucking them into bed, Rachel got a call from Ryan. He was in the ER again after being punched. Rachel assured him it wasn't me, as I'd spent the day at the fair with her and the girls. Ryan wasn't pleased. I left Rachel's house around 9 p.m., knowing that things between us were moving towards something more. Sunday afternoon, and I picked up Rachel and her daughters, and we headed to Rick's place. My whole family was there, including Emily, who had brought her date. It was a big moment for Rick, having me in his home for the first time since he got married. Mary warmly introduced Rachel and her girls, and they were quickly welcomed. Things took a turn when Cole pulled me aside. "Dad, I messed up," he admitted. "I fell for Mom's manipulation. She tricked me. Uncle Rick and my colleagues filled me in last week." "What did you learn from this?" I asked, curious to hear what he had to say. "When it comes to family," Cole said, "sometimes it's best to keep your distance. No matter what you do, you might just make things worse. They need to figure things out in their own time, not yours." "You're right, but it's tough because we care so much," I admitted. "Your mom and I will talk one day, but not anytime soon, considering how she's been acting." Cole nodded. "Yeah, her behavior speaks for itself." "It does. Look at Rachel," I continued. "She endured a loveless marriage until she felt ready to raise her daughters on her own. She showed patience until the time was right. Her actions reflect her character." "Your mom's behavior shocked Emily and me with its cruelty. She says one thing, but her actions tell a different story. As Grandpa used to say," I added, "if I'm not worth the truth, then you're not worth lying to." "Dad, here's a tough question," Cole said somberly. "What else did she lie about?" "That's something we may never fully know," I replied. "There's no use dwelling on the past, son. All we can do is learn from it and move forward." "I'm really impressed by Rachel, Dad," Cole admitted, "but the more I hear about Mom and Ryan, the more I think they deserve each other." Just then, Emily approached us, noticing the attention our conversation was drawing. "Maybe we can finish this later," she suggested. "We're done, sis," Cole assured her. I just needed to apologize to Dad. With that, he walked away, leaving Emily curious. "Just a case of saying the wrong thing," I clarified. "It's good to see you owned up to it." Meanwhile, Rick and Mary were enjoying dinner with their family, and Mary snapped several pictures, especially when Lisa kept close watch over me. When the inevitable water fight broke out, I joined in enthusiastically, though it ended with me drenched and resting in a lounge chair to try off. Lisa climbed into my lap and drifted off to sleep. I glanced over and saw Mary and Rachel chatting, likely about the budding connection between me and her daughters. My father joined me as I relaxed. "This little one seems to have pitted you," he remarked, looking at Lisa. "Just make sure revenge isn't your motive." I chuckled and recounted the journey of my relationship with Rachel, starting from her first phone call. He nodded thoughtfully. "I should have trusted my instincts back then." He then revealed, "Your mother asked me to talk to you. Whatever path you choose, know that we support you." "Dad, look at the world today," I said, shifting topics. "A Democrat who echoes the values of JFK wins the presidency, but conservative members of Congress are stepping down. The GOP now stands for Kennedy's views, but the media brands him a traitor. They're trying to impeach him, even though he's consistent. Meanwhile, they back a candidate with the same actions they accuse him of. What message does that send? They share the same disregard for truth and morality as my soon-to-be ex-wife, I continued. To them, values only matter when someone's behind bars. Then they feign remorse. My dad laughed. People ought to flush 100% of the media's truths down the toilet. Real honesty is hard to find these days, but folks are too blind to see that. It's amazing to see two factions of Democrats at each other's throats. And despite all the opposition, it makes me wonder if the real problem with him is that he's too competent. Strong words, Marcus, my dad said, but it highlights how powerful the media is as a propaganda tool. The following Monday, while I was in my office, a detective came by to discuss the ongoing issue with Ryan. It took about an hour to go over everything I knew, and I gave him a list of women whose husbands had discovered Ryan's affairs. Officer, I said, you should speak with Linda O'Neill. She has more details on this. It's been over 6 weeks since I found out about their relationship. Ryan's wife, Rachel, was the one who tipped me off. The detective nodded, noting everything down. Ryan seems to blame you for ruining his marriage, he observed. It sounds like he's the kind of guy who can't take responsibility for his own actions. After the detective left, I called Linda to give her a heads up. She expected something like this from Ryan. He was always trying to set people up, and she believed he was the reason she had been dismissed from the firm. Later that evening, I returned home to my parents' house and learned that it was my mother's letter that finally made Tiffany give up. Until then, she thought there was still a chance we could work things out. On Wednesday, Emily and I took Rachel and her daughters to dinner at the pasta house, and my sons joined us. During the meal, I shared the news that Tiffany had finally hired a lawyer to handle the divorce. Rachel's daughters were thrilled by Emily's company, and overall, the dinner was a success. 2 months passed since our last family meeting, and on Friday afternoon, I sat next to Linda O'Neill in court, waiting to be called before Judge Robin Nicullo. Across from us sat Tiffany and her lawyer from the firm. We had already agreed on property division, and since there was no mortgage, it was a straightforward process. Tiffany would buy out my share of the house and give me half of our joint savings. Once called before the judge, we confirmed our agreement, finalizing the divorce. On my way out, Tiffany stopped me on the steps and said, I ruined myself. I finally admitted everything to the boys, and Emily still won't speak to me. She thinks I did all of this on purpose. I could accept that explanation from Emily because of her inexperience, I replied, but from an adult, it sounds superficial. Rachel's divorce had already been finalized, and she got everything she could from Ryan. He was ordered to pay $1,000 a month in child support, $1,500 for each child until they turned 18, and half of their college expenses. Their house was to be sold with the profits split. Ryan had left the company and moved to another city, likely tired of his constant encounters with angry people. With his share of the firm, he was set for life. One evening, my parents invited Rachel and her girls over for dinner, and to our surprise, they had also invited her parents. Since our relationship was becoming more serious, they thought it was time to get to know her family. Linda O'Neill had negotiated with the firm's insurance company, and it looked like our case would be settled out of court. After paying Linda her 30% fee, we were each set to receive over $750,000. That night, as we sat around the formal dining room table, which hadn't been used in years, I stood up, pushed back my chair, and got down on one knee. Taking out a small box, I asked, Rachel, will you take a second chance and marry me? Rachel, completely shocked, said, yes. That's when the real celebration began. Mom had to call Rick, Mary, and my 2 sons to share the good news, and they arrived within half an hour. In the middle of all the excitement, I noticed Lisa sitting quietly on the floor, tears in her eyes. I walked over and sat down beside her. She immediately climbed into my lap. What's wrong, baby? I asked gently. Nothing, she whispered. I'm just happy you're going to be my dad. I looked over at Rachel, who had tears in her eyes too, and I knew she could see them in mine. I stood up, holding Lisa, and walked over to her mother. Everyone understood how important that moment was. Lucia came over and stood next to us. Dad, she asked softly, when you and Mom get married, will we take your last name too? As soon as the court allows, I promised. Lucia and Lisa turned to my father, who smiled and said, from now on you can call us Grandma and Grandpa. I could already imagine my daughters spending time at the farm, learning how to ride horses with my dad. They were going to love it. Later, in private, Rachel asked, how are you going to convince Ryan to let you adopt the girls and change their last name? Leave that to me, I said confidently. A month later, I showed up at Ryan's office unannounced. His secretary told me to go right in. When I closed the door behind me, I could see his face had healed, but the damage was still visible. He'd been punched 8 times, and while the detective had interviewed all of his former lovers and their husbands, there were no solid suspects. "I think you've heard that Rachel and I are getting married," I said as he looked up. His face went pale, and I could tell he believed I was behind his injuries. "What do you want?" he asked nervously. "I need your permission to legally adopt your daughters so they can take my last name." Lucia asked her mother and me if she and her sister could take my name. "This has to be done legally, recognizing us both as their fathers." "Why should I agree to this?" he asked. "Because if you do, I'll stay out of your life for good," I said. "If you don't, well, we might cross paths a lot more." It took him half an hour to type up the document and sign it. His secretary, who was also a notary, stamped it. I knew he didn't care much for the girls, as he hadn't seen them since he left for Los Angeles. Later that day, I stopped by the school where Rachel taught. I had to go to the office because they didn't know me yet. When they called her class, she came to the office, surprised to see me. "Rachel, I made a promise to your daughters the day I proposed," I said, handing her an envelope. "I think this will help us give them what they want." She opened it, and her eyes filled with tears as she read the document. "How did you manage this?" she asked. "Ryan still believes I'm responsible for his face meeting those fists," I said. "I used that to our advantage. I thought we could make it official on our wedding day. Lucia and Lisa can legally take my last name." Emily had been right. When I made a promise, especially to a child, I kept it. Later that afternoon, we met with Linda to finalize the adoption papers. It took only 20 minutes to prepare the documents and get them filed in court. A week later, we found out the adoption would be approved and the girls would officially become walkers. We held a family meeting to announce that in 2 weeks, 6 days before Christmas, Rachel and I would exchange vows and the adoption would be finalized. Lucia and Lisa were ecstatic, and my parents couldn't wait to have their new granddaughters. That night, as we sat by the fire, Lucia climbed onto my lap and said, "Thank you, Dad." "For what?" I asked. "For loving us enough to keep your promise." I couldn't speak, so I just held her tightly, grateful for the family we were building together. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.